Welcome to lesson 2. In this lesson, I would like to give actual and additional information about internet access and digital literacy. Also information about the intentions of platforms and providers, competing companies in social media, and the misuse of customer rights and data. You don't need a broad digital knowledge using social media. But social media is more than just a bit of Facebook, Twitter and so on. Social media thrive on dialogue and interaction, and I would like to talk about rights and obligations as well. By obligations here, I also mean protecting yourself on the internet. This means being careful what information we reveal about ourselves. This means, for example, that we activate a VPN, virtual private network, a network protection that ensures that we are not visible to virtual bystanders. When talking about networks and the role of providers and platforms, it is important to know that there are different networks for different purposes, uses and interests. The basic idea of all networks is that users can exchange information, write messages, keep in touch and exchange, share pictures, etc. about your life, your job, your hobbies, your travels, etc. But that alone cannot be in the interest of the providers. They primarily have other interests, namely to make corporate profits, to make a profit from the user's information, their data and the evaluation of the data, for instance, for advertising purposes. Therefore, the interest is to attract as many users as possible to make money. Facebook and other social networks are not bound by Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, by international human rights law, especially the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, nor by national fundamental rights constitutions on freedom of expression. They decide according to their judgment what they let publish and what not, but freedom of expression is valid on these platforms as well. After court rulings on freedom of expression in social media, a case involving Facebook in Germany, several newspapers commenting on the rulings argued that the network companies should respect freedom of expression like the state. This framing is common in the context of digital corporations. There are concerns, even fears, among some, that the large corporations are restricting the right to freedom of expression and informational self-determination by their practices, for instance, through manipulation. Some academics and lawyers have suggested, especially since there are quite often hate speech, etc. on these platforms, that social media companies shall adopt the international human rights laws, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights as a uniform source for rules on content moderation. However, both were written and ratified for states, not for private companies. Several higher court decisions have been made in some countries that social media may not so quickly delete user comments. However, these decisions were later all viewed differently by the Supreme Court as fundamental rights do not directly bind private companies. In many democratic countries, the right to freedom of expression is enshrined in the Constitution. For the press, freedom of expression and media freedom ends where other people's rights are violated. Unfortunately, this is in real life not always the case. Regarding social media users, Not to mention that users can quickly post messages and pictures anonymously. The media shall only publish personal photos with the consent of the person depicted, right to one's image. This is no different in social networks, but is rarely observed by users and rarely punished by providers. When we speak of freedom of expression, we are completely free to say what needs to be said. But some laws must be observed on the internet as well. It is not a lawless space, as many people often mistakenly think. Calling for crimes, genocide, etc. is strictly prohibited. I can say what I want, because it is my right to freedom of expression. As with most things, there are restrictions and limits to the right to freedom of expression. Therefore, the claim that I can say what I want because it is my right to free speech is not entirely true. A classic example: you may have the right to shout fire, fire in an open field, but you cannot and should not shout fire, fire in a crowded cinema when there is no real fire. Common sense tells us that if you mistakenly shout fire, fire in a crowded cinema, you are likely to start a panic and hurt people trying to get to safety. End of lesson 2.